This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. The bedroom that I am designing in this renovation will not have a closet or a dresser. What I am going to build is what I'm calling a clothing storage unit. So here on the wall, you can see I've got the painter's tape laid out showing what I'm going to be building. From the left, you see that there's kind of a little square. That is where the cubbies are going to go. Now, in the original bedroom, I had cubbies. I like them, so I'm going to put them in this one. Then, to the right, you've got some vertical pieces of tape, and what that's going to be is a partition separating the cubbies from the clothing. Then the upper and lower horizontal bars, that is going to be the upper bar and the lower bar where I hang clothes. The upper will be for winter clothes and the lower one will be for summer clothes. And everything else will be shown in a later chapter on how I'm going to store the other miscellaneous things in the bedroom so that I will not need a closet and I will not need a dresser. So to get started, I cut a piece of plywood, and as you can see, I've got some pocket hole screws in it. Here's a close-up of the pocket hole with the screws in, ready to go on the wall. And here you can see that I've mounted it right where the vertical pieces of tape were, and I am screwing it into the wall, and then it will be attached to the floor with an L bracket. As you walk into the bedroom, this is the partition wall that you're going to see. Then at the top, because the ceiling is not perfectly level, I had to put an extra piece of the ceiling strapping just so that it would catch, and run another pocket screw in to hold the top. And then I started making the little shelf that the cubbies are going to go on. Now if you go all the way back to the kitchen, you'll see where I used 3 chrome legs for the kitchen table. The 4th leg went into storage for a few years, and now I'm finally going to be using that 4th leg. And here you can see how I have mounted it. And there's a special feature of this. Not only will the cubby set on it, but it is not touching the wall. And there's a reason why that shelf does not go to the wall. That's because the sliding door that you'll see in some upcoming chapters will slide behind it, because like the other rooms I've worked on, if the door swung in, it was in the way. If it swung out, it was in the way. So just like the bathroom, I'm having the door slide. So that is where that's going to go, and there you can see a little slot where that door will slide right in behind the cubbies. And then I started putting the cubbies up. There is the end piece that is the curved section, and then I started adding the cubbies onto that shelf. And there all the cubbies are roughly set in place, so that I'm going to have 9 cubbies and 3 open shelves, plus the top will be used too. So now we're going to turn our attention to the other side. So that gap is 5 feet. So I bought an extra heavy rod, and even though they say you're only supposed to go 4 feet without a support, you can go 5 feet. And it roughly aligns with the tape that I've got on the wall. And to make sure that I had a good solid mount, I took a piece of, I think it was 1x4, and ran it vertically on the right-hand side to give me a good solid base. Then I added the upper rod, and it's pretty much mocked up right now, the clothing storage unit. Now, to get the spacing, I downloaded this off the internet that showed me rough spacing for 2 rods, and there was some discussion online that the distance that these plans gave was not quite right, so I adjusted mine. That's what I went with, and it has worked out. And then got to have a place for pants, so I've got this hanging rod that is supported by the partition and by an eye bolt that is going to run parallel to the wall and under the cubbies to house pants. So then I had to start priming, because eventually it's got to be painted. And there it is painted, and it's beginning to look pretty good. So then the problem that I've had is those cubbies are made out of sawdust and glue. You need a way to bolt them together. So from Amazon, I bought these socket cap bolts and barrel nuts. And what you do is you drill a hole and push the barrel nut through the wall. And then on right there, it's almost pushed through. Then on the other side, you put the screw, and then you just start tightening it together. And that's what both sides look like. I don't forget what size Allen it is, but it's an Allen that they provide. And you just crank that down, and it holds them very, very well. Here's a picture of the whole thing put together. And each cubby has 2 barrel bolts and screws, and they are now very solid. And on the far end, on the right, you can see where I have used the same barrel bolts to bolt it to the partition. Then it was a matter of starting to fill it. So all the long sleeve winter shirts go on the top row, and the summer short sleeve shirts go on the bottom row. And if you notice up at the top rail looks out of place against the ceiling, because the ceiling does take a little bit of a dip, but those rails are level. And I got an idea, and I took down the cubbies and I put this piece of expanded aluminum mesh that I got at Home Depot. I tacked that on, which will then, when it is installed back on the shelf, it not only gives me a back that I can't put stuff too far into the cubby so that it would hit the sliding door when that gets put in, but also it gives me a little wall on top so that if I want to set something on top, that won't flop over and get in the way of the door. So that is how I built what I call a clothing storage unit in the bedroom renovation.